Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight, I'm going to be reacting to the far-right French Revolution, the 6th February crisis between two wars, 1934, part 4 of 4 by Time Ghost History. If you want to check out my previous reactions, remember the playlist card will be at the top. Just click on it and you'll be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as Time Ghost History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Fascism, corruption, economic hardship, ideological rivalry, anti-Semitism.
Hey, bonjour, Indinadel. Comment ça va?
These words can describe pretty much every European country in the interwar years. France is no exception, and in 1934, on the night of February 6th, this all comes together to trigger the worst political violence the country has seen for generations. Once the dust settles, the battle lines within France will be more stark than ever. Bonjour, je suis Indy Nidel, and this is Entre deux guerres, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. If, in the aftermath of the Great War, Germany is facing a national humiliation, and if Italy is facing a frustration in victory, then we may say that France is facing a lost peace. France emerged victorious from the war, sure, but at a cost of close to 5% of its population. Nearly 9 million men were mobilized to fight for France, and around 73% of them were either killed or wounded. Those who survived are still often a visible scar on the streets of France. And the staggering loss of young men heightens fears over declining birth rates. The country is also in financial ruin. It has gone from a creditor nation to a debtor nation. Vital industries in the Northeast were utterly obliterated during the war, and the franc has plummeted in value. And such trauma inevitably leads to political division. The brutalizing experience of the trenches and the military patriotism of the war years have created a whole generation of radicalized veterans. Ultranationalism such as this has always been hostile to the political left, but the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia has intensified hatred of the Red Menace, and any groups associated with it have become targets. This really comes to a head in 1924.
And also basically whatever, Bolshevik Russia, or should I say, the leaders like Stalin, whatever they say, goes for the rest of the other, red parties that exist across Europe. Whatever what do they call it? The International, the Communist International, whatever's been said there will set the tone for all the other, communist political parties across Europe. So yeah, it's a threat. Really, it's a threat.
After the election of the so-called Cartel de Gauche, an electoral alliance between the center-left Radical Party and other more left-wing groups. In response, several new leagues are formed or grow in strength. Groups such as the Jeunesse Patriote and the Fascistes begin to develop a far-right agenda. The latter group is more overtly fascist than the former. Indeed, the Fascistes are the first real fascist party to emerge outside of Italy. But both groups, like many others formed in this time, see veterans as the men who will rejuvenate France, save her from Republican leftism, and preserve her conservative traditions. Both groups also have paramilitary units with their own uniforms and with big parades. Alongside these newer groups is the Action Française. Founded during the Dreyfus Affair in 1899, the group promotes the principle of integral nationalism, a counter-revolutionary and royalist doctrine incorporating anti-parliamentarianism, authoritarianism, Catholicism, anti-Semitism, and ultranationalism. Though already a significant movement, the rise of the cartel has given it a golden opportunity for publicity. Other less radical but still right-wing groups are also emerging, the largest being the Fédération Nationale Catholique. Led by General de Castelnau, it has mobilized mass Catholic support against the government.
Like there's so many political parties springing up in France. There's more diversity of political parties, being brought up out of all sectors of society than in most European countries. It's interesting. It's very interesting.
In 1926, its membership will rise to 1.8 million. However, that same year, the cartel government collapses and is replaced by a more right-wing one under veteran conservative Raymond Poincaré. A general election in 1928 further secures the political position of conservative parties. So, the cries against the degenerate leftists have kind of lost their potency. However, the ground is still fertile for the far right to sow their seeds. The memories of war remain vivid, especially as France finds itself increasingly isolated from Britain and the United States. The national sacrifice at Verdun is compared bitterly by many to the corrupt liberalism, declining birth rates, and the new woman of the 1920s. Despite the new conservative government passing effective legislation, the political class is becoming discredited. You see, they're borrowing a fair amount from the radical program. This might win over the typical voter, sure, might create a sense of consensus, but it angers the nationalist right. They are joined by an increasing number of young intellectuals frustrated at the lack of prospects in the Republic. Though varied, they share a suspicion of Americanism and materialism with an accompanying veneration of French traditionalism. Okay, it is worth mentioning that not every veteran or young person has become a violent nationalist. In fact, pacifism has actually been on the rise in France. This is expressed by both dominant socialist parties and many veterans organizations pledging themselves to peace. Nevertheless,
that's good. That's very, very good. Hopefully they have enough numbers behind their back, for this kind of pacifist movement to really be taken notice of, because usually in other countries, there are people who are pacifists or who are neutral, who don't want to choose a side, and usually those people are outnumbered between the people who are on the left or on the right or in the center. So yeah. Hopefully there's enough of them in France to try and neutralize any type of potential threat. I don't know, but yeah.
As France enters the 1930s, shadowy forces on the horizon grow clearer. She has actually escaped the worst parts of the worldwide depression so far. In fact, French financial markets are looking strong and the government budget is in surplus. But economic technicalities do little to calm the pessimism among the populace. Conservative governments remain in power until April 1932, when they are defeated by another cartel de gauche. However, the cartel fails to transform its electoral alliance into a governmental one. And now, like Germany some years earlier, French politics is going through, I guess what you'd call a cascade of cabinets. The socialists who worked with the Radical Party are pretty suspicious of bourgeois governments and offer only conditional parliamentary support. This means that governments are continually facing instability and insecurity. Political deadlocks happen again and again, and successive cabinets collapse.
So you could say it's like the era of the coalition, parties and coalition governments in France during that time, and they're on unstable ground. Nobody trusts anybody. Everybody is still out for their own vested interests, and they're just literally partners for convenience sake, but even that is just not holding them together. So yeah, it's like a merry-go-round of chairs. There'll be this government, and then there'll be that government, and there'll be the next government. Yes, there were some nations across Europe that were also going through something similar, where their governments just kept on being replaced again and again and again. So yeah, we're going through that same process here with France as well.
Fueling this political turbulence is a growing public unrest over a host of different grievances. See, now, a couple of years later, the Depression is hitting France harder and harder. There are mass protests against war debts, against pension cuts, against rising taxes, against tumbling agricultural prices, and against slashed wages. It really does look like France has lost the peace. Indeed, Marshal Philippe Pétain himself, known as the Lion of Verdun, amplifies this narrative. In a 1932 speech commemorating that famous battle, he expresses dismay that the patriotism of the war has now given way to bitter division. And to top it all off, the ascendance of Hitler in Germany in 1933 creates panic across much of France. In terms of both population and industrial capacity, Germany is basically double the size of France, and Hitler's withdrawal from a rearmament conference heightens fears that France is now in danger from both internal and external enemies. So, like most of interwar Europe, France is sitting on a bonfire of political, social, and economic problems that seems to be just waiting for a match to set it all ablaze. For the Third Republic, this will be the political scandal known as the Stavisky Affair. Serge Alexandre Stavisky was born in 1886 to a Jewish family in what was then the Russian Empire. The family soon moved to France, and as he grew up, Serge became increasingly involved with fraudulent enterprises. From his teenage years, he has behind him a string of fake companies, bad checks, stolen securities. Now, he's arrested in 1926, but freed 17 months later on medical grounds, and he continues his shady career. Now,
what medical grounds? No. You should have stayed in prison. There should be like a medical ward. Oh, gosh.
Stavisky is nothing more than a petty crook, but he is also a real charmer and a true socialite of his day. He somehow bagged himself a Chanel model for a wife and has a knack for making friends in high places. But by the end of 1933, the law is catching up with him. On Christmas Day, he flees Paris after a lucrative scheme of his begins to unravel. It basically involves local politicians and their assistance in securing bad bonds, fake or stolen jewelry, and pawn shops. Once the right-wing press gets wind of this tangled web, they declare it a new Republican scandal. Things only get more scandalous on January 8th when police find Stavisky dying from a gunshot wound in a remote alpine chalet. It is officially a suicide, but speculation is rife that the police murdered him as part of a government cover-up. Now, scandals like this are not exactly new in French politics, and they have been the ammunition of choice for anyone looking to discredit republicanism. As far back as the French Revolution, monarchist philosopher Joseph de Maistre said, "Listening to these so-called Republicans talk of liberty and virtue is like watching some faded courtesan feigning the modest blushes of a virgin." Other more recent scandals, though, have also fueled public mistrust of the French Republic. So there's nothing particularly unique about the Stavisky affair. Only 6 politicians are directly implicated, and none of them are exceptionally high-ranking. But the fact that Stavisky is Jewish and that several of the ruling center-left politicians are implicated and that France is in the grip of depression make it a tailor-made opportunity for the radical right. Calls for action grow louder. The Minister of Colonies is forced to resign once it becomes clear that he provided assistance to Stavisky. But the right-wing press does not stop there, and street demonstrations are on the rise. Newspaper headlines scream, "Down with the robbers, down with the assassins." They now also call for Prime Minister Camille Chatham to resign. He is already a hated figure for his Masonic connections, and right-wing groups hold daily demonstrations against him and the entire Republican establishment. Protesters barricade the streets with cars. They even tear down trees. Chatham eventually is forced to resign and is replaced by Edouard Daladier on January 30th. Daladier is conscious of the rising threat. I mean, it'd be hard to miss it. He knows he needs to build a stronger alliance with other left-wing groups. To show that his radical party is serious about this, he dismisses Paris police prefect and far-right sympathizer Jean Chiappe from his post. But this only aggravates the enemies of the Republic further, who accuse Daladier of attempting to establish a left-wing dictatorship. They come together, loosely that is, to hold a massive demonstration against the Third Republic. Now, I say loosely because there isn't really any central aim or coordination. Instead, a variety of leagues decide that on the night of February 6th, they will stage action against the Republic. And that's pretty much all they agree on. Some want an outright coup. Others are less clear about what they want at all. One of the main groups is the good old Action Française. There are some suggestions they want to overthrow the government, but their actions seem to prove otherwise. Tonight, they are primarily represented by their youth wing, with few of the major leaders present. In fact, the League's leader, Charles Maurras, has chosen to spend the night writing poems rather than go out in the cold winter night and overthrow the system. Now,
man, this is all very confusing. It's disorganized and even the leadership structures are not present. Yeah, no.
As you might be thinking, that's not really the tactics of a group staging a full-blown revolution. The Jeunesse Patriote have a slightly more precise position. They do not wish to overthrow the Republic itself, but do very much want to replace the current government with a more authoritarian one. Also present are the Croix de Feu, formed in 1927 and led by Colonel Larocque. It is another league made up of veterans, around 100,000 of them to be exact. Now, about 61% of this membership live in Paris, and many of them show up tonight. But it's tough to work out what they hope to achieve. Indeed, there are suggestions that Larocque had to be pressured from the other leagues to join in the first place. There are also smaller fascist or far-right oriented groups present, such as the Solidarité Française and Mouvement Franquiste. Even between their members, there is no consensus. Many
Like, people just crocked up. They just, attended. They don't know why they're attending. They don't know why they're here. They're just here. This is just has a potential for chaos. It's messy. It's just going to be a messy situation because there's no clear objective about what are we here for. What are we here doing here right now at this very moment. The leadership is also in disarray. Others have been coerced into joining. Others are at home writing poems. Like,
you want a complete coup. Others just want to demonstrate their anger, right? So to make this heady mix just a little bit more confusing, communist groups have also got themselves involved. Despite being opposed to these far-right groups and often coming to blows with them, they also have a desire to overthrow the liberal democratic system. It is important to note that the Communist Party has also called on its members to fight fascists tonight, as well as government forces. But
it's a mess. It's a mess.
Despite the complex disunity, these groups are a severe threat to French democracy. The ever-sensationalist Paris press has published detailed descriptions of the League plans and the League manifestos, and such publicity leads to large crowds gathering at points throughout the city. In the evening, they start to march on the Place de la Concorde. As night comes, things start to get violent. Police block the Concorde Bridge, and the mob begins hurling debris and rocks in response. Cavalry are sent in as reinforcements and charge at the demonstrators, but the mob have brought with them sticks with razor blades attached. If they succeed in cutting down a horse, they leap upon the fallen rider and beat him savagely. The first shots are soon fired. Now, no one knows from where or from whom, but they heighten the panic. The fighting intensifies. Communist demonstrators now also break away and pillage the Rue Royale, and buildings, government or otherwise, in the area are set ablaze. Rocks are thrown at firefighters battling the flames. Meanwhile, an equal amount of chaos has taken place in the Chamber of Deputies itself. Since 3 p.m., Daladier has consistently been prevented from reading his ministerial declaration. Conservatives keep breaking into choruses of the Marseillaise, and communists keep belting out the Internationale. Fistfights occur between rival deputies. The speaker's been forced to suspend the session several times, and just when things settle down, the deputies hear the first shots ring out, and many flee, hurrying past the injured police treated by doctors in the corridors. By the time things are finally adjourned at around 8:30 p.m., there are only about 5 non-cabinet member deputies left in the chamber. Back outside, much of the mob has turned towards the presidential palace and the Ministry of the Interior. After some bloody fighting, they are beaten back and retreat to the Concorde once again. Then, at about 10:30, rioters, unaware that the deputies have left, begin a full assault on the bridge in front of the assembly building. By 11:30, they seem to be breaking through the last police barricade. The guards panic and shoot indiscriminately without warning at the charging mob, halting it in its tracks. As midnight comes around, demonstrators are finally beaten back. Fires are now being taken care of, and police take control of the situation. By 2:30 in the morning, the riots seem to be over for now. But the following week sees further chaos and further violence. At midday the next day anyhow, Daladier is forced to resign after the cartel falls once again, and the police and judiciary challenge his authority. In his place now is former President Gaston Doumergue and a new right-wing cabinet. Street fights, demonstrations, and strikes will take place throughout the next few days, adding to the worst civil bloodshed France has seen since the days of the Paris Commune.
Is that the president? You know, the guy with the blood gushing out of his own forehead like that. Is that the president? Wow.
It is widely believed by the left that this has all been a fascist coup. Again, the press do little to calm these fears. Later in the week, socialist and communist groups come together to protest against the fascist threat. Now, obviously, I just detailed how communist rioters fought alongside fascist ones, but this seems to be the result more of organizational confusion and mob mentality rather than any ideological cause. In fact, Moscow has been pressuring the communist parties to adopt a more conciliatory stance towards left-wing and moderate groups. They are advised now to form popular fronts against the ultimate enemy, Nazi Germany. Anti-fascism is the priority of international communism now, and in the coming years, it will join forces with even the radicals to form a bulwark against the radical right. Speaking of the radical right, February 6th has in many ways been a success for them. They have successfully forced a center-left cabinet out of government, a first in the Third Republic. Tens of thousands of new members are now also swelling the ranks of the leagues like the Croix de Feu. Many of the parliamentary right wing have now also been radicalized, adding...
I've just realized that Indy Nadel calls the French Republic the Third Republic. I wonder why does he call it the Third Republic? You know, what was the First Republic or the Second Republic? Yeah.
To the political stratification. We could, of course, look at this and see France as a nation full of people just waiting for either a new war or a dictatorship. But it's important to remember that, leaving aside the extremist forces of the time, much of public opinion leans towards pacifist democracy, and pacifist groups boast literally millions of members. At the same time, however, the battle lines have been well and truly drawn. The political turbulence of the 1920s and 1930s has shown that many of the men in charge of running and defending the Third Republic despise it. The formation of a popular front may be desirable for the ordinary citizen who has no wish to see a fascist surge. But to conservative generals of the army, it reeks of entry-level communism. This is also mirrored in the massive growth of the far-right leagues after February 6th, and their work to undermine the Third Republic continues. And who knows if a united popular front will be able to survive and fight off the fascist threats anyhow. By this point, pretty much every communist party in Europe defers to Moscow. And if Stalin's position on Nazi Germany changes, so will everyone else's. The unity of Verdun is now but a distant memory. Things have fallen apart. Will the center be able to hold? If you'd like to learn more about the global rise of fascism, and understand what it actually is a little bit better, then have a look at our video on the rise of evil. You can click on it right here. Should be any minute now. Our patron of the week is Yorick Krone. Thanks to people like Yorick, good name, Yorick, we can now enjoy the financial stability that 1930s Europe never did. So do the right thing and subscribe to us at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And now, vive la révolution! Santé!
Okay, guys, that's it with the far-right French Revolution, the 6th February crisis between two wars, 1934, part 4 of 4 by Time Ghost History. Yeah, it seems like the French are also having their own turmoil with the different political parties and ideologies, whether they're part of the extreme left or the extreme right or the center. You know, everybody are in their own little camps, young, the old, the veterans, you know, the so-called freedom fighters, the so-called loyalists of the Third Republic, you know, all of these factions, all of these groupings fighting amongst each other, trying to gain the support of the majority of the people in France. And what I like mostly is that, you know, there was a large population of the country that wanted to stick to pacifism. You know, they don't want to have these kind of antagonistic and violent and intimidating groupings, you know, controlling their country. They didn't want any of this authoritarianism or fascism or any type of government that would suppress the people and their freedoms. So yeah, there was a lot of fighting in France. Even after their victory in World War I, it was much more like a bitter victory, a bitter taste victory. You know, they just never fully recovered from that war. And now, to add further insult to injury, you know, you had the economic meltdown, and that also exacerbated situations. And yeah, you know, France, I thought France had a far larger population than Germany. You know, I thought France had a far larger population than Germany. I thought it had a far more, you know, powerful economic output than Germany during those times, because, you know, France was like one of the superpowers in Europe for a very, very long time. But I guess, you know, things have changed over time, and now they have this enemy next door, the Germans, who are rising up in power, in military strength. They're being led by a leader, you know, who's bent on conquering all of Europe someday. I say someday, for now it's like someday, yeah. So yeah, they have the external threats, they also now have their own internal threats that are destabilizing their Third Republic. And yeah, it was quite interesting to hear how France was doing while everybody else were also having their own issues. You know, you can look at Italy, how they also were going through massive changes as well. And the other countries, like maybe Spain, was also going through some serious changes. Russia, you know, with their revolution as well, and their new government that is totally different from anything else on the continent, really, you know, and how they've spread their ideology throughout Europe, you know, having all of these communist parties popping up. So yeah, things were changing drastically, and France was nowhere to be seen at this, you know, at that forefront of stability and you know, a proper functioning democracy. They were just heading through the same chaotic process like every other nation on Europe. So yeah, that's interesting. Okay guys, I guess that's it for tonight. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Time Ghost History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I'll see you guys next week, Tuesday. Okay? Au revoir.